Ripple me this, riddle me that. Who's about to get smacked with a big baseball bat? We're going to talk global financial system, folks. Strap in. Let's go. All right. Today I'm going to cover some Trump foreshadowing that he did about a year and a half ago about sort of global currencies. We're going to hear from the IMF, the World Bank. I'm going to talk about some of the SWIFT changes that are inbound for later this year. Then I'm going to tie it all together wonderfully and give you my opinion of where this is going. I think it's going to be really informative, a little bit complicated, a little bit technical. You know, hopefully I can do a good job of explaining it easy enough for you guys to follow along. Let's get going here and listen to this slimy guy.
As far as the currency devaluations, I've been complaining about that for a long time.
Long time.
And I believe that we will all eventually, and probably very much sooner than a lot of people understand or think.
Now, listen to the words that he used right there. I think those are key. Sooner than people understand or think. Now, what he's sort of cluing us into is this is not a little tweak. This is not a fine-tune adjustment. This is a paradigm shift that people currently don't understand or even think about.
We will be all at a level playing field.
Now, how do you get a level playing field? I mean, if you understand like I do, and I'm an anarchist, governments or groups or competing groups of criminal enterprises who are all trying to pull off the biggest heist they can while retaining the legitimacy of the people they claim to be serving. So there is zero trust between all of these countries. So by leveling the playing field, how do you do that? Well, maybe if you have this thing called XRP, which can't be artificially inflated, there's no way to game the system. It's a secure digital asset. You could use something like that to level the playing field between all of these different countries to transfer value.
Because that's the only way it's fair. That's the only way that you can fairly compete in trade and other things.
Other things. What could those other things be? Now, the only other thing, I mean, the countries are trading money back and forth. They're trading goods and services back and forth. But the main thing, the overarching sort of organization is the IMF and the SDR. The SDR, special drawing rights, if you don't know what that is, everybody kind of pays into the IMF. They create this, they use this basket of currencies to determine the value of the SDR. They use that to loan to countries like Greece, who are just spending like drunken sailors and have gotten themselves into big trouble. The SDR money comes with strings, basically, which are called austerity measures, which basically say, hey, stop spending like drunken sailors, spend within your means, live within your means. And of course they go crazy and, oh, this is outrageous. How could you make us do this? And yada, yada, yada. And of course they never want to look at like the pension plans that pay 5 times over what the private market can do. You know, that couldn't be the problem. It's just that the IMF's a bunch of meanies. So Trump's kind of pointing out that a paradigm shift is coming here. And he said this, I think this is back February 10th, 2017. So about a year and a half ago, sometime around there. Okay, let's move on and hear from the ASK director of the IMF.
Sometimes we don't realize we're living through a revolution.
So he's telling us right off the bat, folks, something revolutionary is unfolding right in front of us all. What is it? Well, let's hear some more. Who knows where fintech will take us?
Hopefully, to a world with increased access to cheaper, faster, and more imaginative financial services.
Now, there he's right. And this is one of the most wonderful things about the evolution in value transfer that's happening to our society, to the human race, essentially, is this is going to make things cheaper, faster, and more imaginative. It's going to increase access to the world's poor. I think it will bring millions, if not billions, out of poverty by giving them access to the global financial system and giving them more options to interact. And I mean, it's the difference of having the internet versus having a phone book and a telephone, you know? Those were the old days when I grew up as a kid. Before, you know, I didn't get the internet until I was a teenager, roughly. And so that's a huge paradigm shift, and that's coming for millions and millions of people. And here's the IMF kind of pointing that out for us. But
advice on investing for retirement could come from robots. We see that challenges will arise for regulators. How to regulate fintechs in a world where boundaries are blurring between institutions and services and countries? This means regulators will have to reimagine oversight, focusing more on specific activities rather than entities.
Okay, so think back to what the BGs have told us. They've said two things that we need, or they've implied two things we need for XRP, XRapid to be rolled out to the world. One is liquidity. Now, we just had the 3 exchanges be named as the preferred liquidity providers for each of those regions, and I expect there will be more down the road of those guys coming. But they've also said regulation has to be worked out. Now, they've hinted that that's a green light, but there have been delays and delays. And I think the reason is, and the IMF guy is telling us here, that that's because it's a new paradigm. They're coming up with sort of a new regime rather than trying to tweak the old system once again. Okay. And I might have skipped something here that's rather important. Yeah, I did. Let's back up.
May issue digital currencies, allowing for cheaper payments and potentially more efficient monetary policy.
Okay, so right there,
more efficient
that is absolutely key. What he's just told us is that central banks will be issuing their own digital currencies. Now, why are they going to do that? Well, think about this. When you have all these different countries and nobody trusts each other because they all know that they're all a bunch of criminals, they want good money, they want sound money, they want money that can't be inflated. But when it comes to the rest of us, well, that's a different story. They want to be able to inflate the money so that they can live beyond their means by stealing the value from all of the existing dollars or digital assets that are out in circulation. So that means, you know, you can create money, but if you create money without creating value, that value has to come from somewhere. And in the case of today's fiat systems, that comes right out of the pockets of everyone, of all the dollar holders. So, you know, they still want to be able to keep that paradigm going. I guarantee you their currencies that the central banks create, they will be able to inflate those and increase and decrease the monetary supply. So here's the IMF guy telling us that. So it's starting to shape up, at least in my mind, that there's going to be this sort of two-tier system. Good money for the criminals at the top, not so great money for all the rest of us that they want us to use. And let's jump, I think if I can find it here.
Rather than entities. How to facilitate easier cross-border payments and lending while protecting against money laundering.
Who does cross-border payments as their primary focus? If you said Ripple, ding, 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 ding. Now, if you've read the Faster Payments Task Force RFP that Ripple submitted, it's 160 pages of some of the best reading you'll ever. It's just thrilling. You won't be able to put it down. They talk about, this is one of the key issues. Ripple kind of takes the stance that they just sort of pass this information along, but there's AML and KYC, money laundering, and know your customer. That's why we have to send pictures of photo ID and all that stuff when registering with the exchanges to interface with the banking systems. So here he's saying that's a priority, something that has to be worked out.
And terrorism financing? This also means new rules to clarify the legal status and ownership of virtual assets.
So not a tweaking of the existing rules, but new rules, a new paradigm, a new regulatory regime that they're currently coming up with and I think getting ready to release.
We are on the edge of a brave new world with all its promise, but also hazards to navigate.
It's a brave new world, folks. You just turn over all your privacy to us and we will take care of the terrorists. Anyway, hopefully it turns out a little better than that. But again, he's telling us this is not a tweak. This is a rip out and replace with something brand new. It's going to be a paradigm shift, just like the last guy said. All right, let's move on to the World Bank. Hear what he's got to say.
The blockchain technology is something that everyone's excited about, right? But we have to remember that Bitcoin was one of the very few instances, and the other times when blockchain was used, they were basically Ponzi schemes.
Bitcoin
right?
equals
So it's
scary,
very
folks.
important that if we go forward with it, we're sure that it's not going to be used to exploit. Now, right now, a very different approach to facilitating the transfer of capital in developing countries.
Again, he's talking cross-border payments, and what are the key markets? Not the big corridors that are heavily used like US dollar to euro or something. Those are very fine-tuned and very efficient. He's talking especially in developed countries. Where does Ripple focus? On those exact corridors.
Is Alibaba's approach. Alibaba has a very different approach. They keep all the data, but they've been able to move capital so quickly in China. It takes 3 seconds to transfer as much as $160,000.
Okay, so two things he pointed out there. One, Alibaba is doing these transfers, moving money into China in just 3 seconds. Who else does 3-second transfers, soon to be 1 second transfers once Cobalt comes out? If you said Ripple, ding, 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 ding. Now, the drawback he's pointing out is, well, they keep the data. Who has a public blockchain? Who transfers all these KMC, AML messages along with the data? If you said Ripple, ding, 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 ding.
To anyone who's part of the Alibaba network, because they can assess credit worthiness in 3 seconds. The argument, of course, is that online activity is a far better indicator of credit worthiness than the traditional KYC practices. So if we could bring something like that to Africa, that...
But see, it doesn't matter because the banks are beholden to the government and the regulators. So they're the ones demanding these KYC and AML requirements. So they're going to have to do, what the guys with the guns want.
Could be transformative. So we're looking at all different technologies, whether it's something like Alibaba, some kind of blockchain technology. But the most important thing is first do no harm. And since so many of these things have looked like Ponzi schemes, we've got to be very careful about that.
Be scared,
You're not a buyer at
don't buy.
5,200.
Don't, no.
Christine
Too
Lagarde said it was too
expensive.
expensive.
Yeah, it's very expensive.
Too expensive, folks. Don't buy it. Stay away. You should be very scared of the blockchain. Okay. Let's look at Swift. Now, if you don't know what Swift is, it is a company that does the transfers for all of the banks to move money around the world. It's error prone, it's slow, it's expensive, it's a terrible process that's not very user friendly. Lots of reasons to replace it. A lot of people on Twitter and so forth in the XRP community think that Ripple and XRP are just going to replace Swift. I don't think so, and I'm about to explain why, but let's get into what's coming here in November. So here's their website, and you can see how lovely this scales right here when you shrink down the window. But there's 3 things coming in this mandatory release for November 18th of this year. One is a security update, and then the other 2 components are what's called MT 2018, which is message type. It's basically the MTs are the sort of payments protocol that governs the transfer of funds. There's, one message type might say send the funds or, whatever. So they're updating that, and the GPI is the Global Payments Initiative. Now, the Global Payments Initiative, let's see if I can find that. Yeah, right here. So Swift GPI is the future of cross-border payments. By the end of 2020, every bank on the network is able to offer same-day, end-to-end delivery with full tracking and transparency throughout the payment chain. Now, if you think that Swift, after decades of doing almost absolutely nothing to upgrade and improve the performance of their system, which has a 6 to 12% error rate, that all of a sudden in the last 6 months or so, they've just figured out what Ripple's been working 4 or 5 years on, you are delusional. So, what could be happening here? Maybe it won't be them doing the transfers. It won't be their digital assets. It will be Ripple, and XRP. Same day end-to-end delivery with full tracking. You get that because you know the path it's going to take before the payment goes with RippleNet, and transparency. It's all recorded in the blockchain. Okay, and then after the 18th, I think they're telling us down here somewhere, basically there's this UETR, which is the unique end-to-end transaction reference, which is basically like the key. It's a payment unique identifier, so that they can throw all these into a database, and all the messages will be tagged with this unique identifier, and they can build one transaction record with all of the different MTs or message types in that transaction record, and then they can do additional data analysis and tracking and investigation and fraud detection and so forth based on that UETR. And the important thing to note is if you don't have it, meaning you haven't done this upgrade by November 18th, your payments will start getting rejected, and it will come back with a, sorry, you can't do that anymore. So that means everybody is absolutely going to make this upgrade, or they're not going to be sending payments to other currencies or to other countries. Okay, let's actually, now I want to drill in. These are the business highlights of the SR 2018, the service release 2018. This goes into detail about the message type changes that are coming in November. I want to scroll down here to the background and summary, and I want to, let's see, there's some new functionality coming, and here's what they're telling us. 1, changes due to regulation that require additional information to be transported in the messages. If you go back to Federal Payments Task Force and Ripple's RFP response, they talk about the KYC and AML, basically encapsulation that they can do to transmit that information. There's also, I believe it's in there, or maybe it was an interview with somebody where they talk about some local markets, you send money in, and even though it's ready to go, it has to sit there for 24 to 48 hours because of local requirements to prevent money laundering or whatever. And here they're telling us new features to support evolving business processes and new financial instruments. I wonder if that's the nice way of saying we're about to be gutted like a fish without using the word blockchain. Do you think? Okay, new definitions to clarify greater consistency and thereby improve automation. So one of the big problems with Swift is it's a very manual process. Sometimes if it's a new kind of setup, you have to do it manually, and both people have to be at the terminal at the same time, and it's a terrible system. So they're making changes to automate it. And again, down here in the bottom, this one's key. We'll get to it in just a second. Major changes to Category 7. What's Category 7? Well, you're going to find out in a minute. But first, okay, let's look. So one of the things they're changing is end-to-end tracking. So with this UETR, they will be able to track payments end-to-end. Now, how would they be able to do that? Well, maybe if they're using Ripple and RippleNet, that's a feature that's already there. Category 3, I think that's this page. There is add an optional field to cover client transparency and commissions and fees. So with Ripple, basically the path gets determined through the network. It finds, if there's multiple paths available, it will find the cheapest, most efficient way to move the value through the RippleNet. But one of the other things it does is it tells you how much it's going to cost. Whereas with Swift, you send it out and every bank that touches it is going to tack on fees. So you don't even know how much it's going to cost until you send the money. In a lot of cases, you have to send more because it takes 3 days and the exchange rates have changed or something like that. But with Ripple, all that stuff is laid out up front. So they are adding fields to add transparency on commissions and fees. Basically, what I think is maybe these are requirements in order to set up the API for Ripple to start using that to move the value. Okay, and then let's go to number 7. This is the big one. What is Category 7? Well, it's interbank MTs, meaning cross-border payments. Once again, major changes to cross-border payments that represents a significant overhaul. Okay. So you technical people will love this one. Change requests. Drivers for this initiative are change requests from the community over the last 10 years. That's right. They haven't implemented change requests for 10 years. I don't know how these guys are getting replaced. It just doesn't make any sense. They are clearly on the ball here, putting, just stockpiling change requests for 10 years, letting their customers suffer through this ridiculous system. Okay, straight through processing transaction flows. So they're making changes in order to basically automate everything. And there's also this section right here, which is talking about letters of credit and standby letters of credit. I think now in Ripple, in their protocol, you establish the path. You basically validate that, everything's ready to go. And then the last point pays the end user and the payment moves back to the sender. So that way, you're ensured that all the payments are going to come through. And I think what these might be is a way to ensure that the funds are there, that they're available, and that they're reserved, so that when this whole thing goes through like that in a second or three to 5 seconds, whatever it's going to end up being, that the system, the SWIFT system, has reserved all of this and it's ready to go. Okay, and I think those are the main things I wanted to point out. So, what does all of this mean? Well, let's take a look here. So I think what might be on the horizon for October, November, and I think Bill Clinton will probably be making a big announcement related to this at the Swell conference coming up on the 1st and 2nd of November. I think Ripple and XRP will be integrated with SWIFT, not be replacing SWIFT. SWIFT is bank owned and run. If the banks are all adopting SWIFT, then guess what? They're going to just instruct SWIFT, hey, you're going to integrate with these guys, make it happen. Sorry, life sucks for you, but do it. And the other reason that SWIFT will be, that they're going to do this through SWIFT instead of replacing SWIFT, is that U.S. sanctions like on Iran and some of these other countries are enforced through SWIFT. So by getting rid of the SWIFT system, the U.S. government, who's one of the biggest terrorizing organizations on the planet, meddling in all over the world, they're going to lose that leverage and that ability to control others. And I don't think that's something they're going to want to give up. Now, I think eventually, especially the smaller banks, they're going to start going straight to RippleNet and getting away from the SWIFT system as soon as they can. And I don't see why the other banks wouldn't do it, but this is certainly buying them time until they can maybe come up with something else. I don't know what that would be. I think another possibility, very real possibility that we'll see, is that the IMF will replace the SDR with XRP. This goes back to the level playing field that Trump was talking about in the beginning. Ripple has these 60 billion XRP in escrow. I think they may be buying, taking ownership, optioning those XRP so that they can use that to provide global liquidity to the system once this thing gets turned up. And I think, Ripple and XRP are going to be the go-to asset and company for moving value globally around the planet. And of course, we talked about this a little bit. The central banks, I think, are going to be launching their own inflatable digital currencies. Good money for them, that's sound money and can't be inflated. Not so great, shitty money for the rest of us that they can inflate and steal the value right out of our pockets. So, this is big. If this turns out to be true, then you are talking literally trillions and trillions of dollars flowing through the Ripple superhighway using the XRP digital asset. And I'm sure you can figure out what that means. Okay, I hope this was helpful. I hope it's a little bit technical, but maybe I explained it well enough that you guys understand. I'll be back with some more. I'm definitely going to drill into this fiat idea here of how the central banks are going to try and launch their own digital currencies. I think that's got a lot of problems, and it's destined to fail. And we'll get into that in a future video. I promise you those are coming. I just have all these sidebars that keep popping up that I think are more important to do, so that's what I'm doing. Okay, folks, have a good day. I'll talk to you later.